it's thinking, because that's what it does. Setting up your Zoom meeting. Okay. It appears that we are live. Oh, good. And the sound is double. That's great. Cool. Okay. Sorry, everybody. We're having technical difficulties all the dang day. If you're watching now that it's live streaming finally, or later because it will be recorded, welcome. This is the Athens Area Democratic Socialists of America with our budget discussions series that we've been doing. And we're very, very glad to have our guest today. That is Imani Scott-Blackwell, a community organizer here and consultant. Do you like consultant as a title?
I've never actually heard anyone refer to me as a consultant, but I do consult, so it applies.
That is the thing you do.
So specifically like with nonprofit consulting, mainly, also some personal coaching too, as an additional add-on this year for my business, Going Rogue, which you can find more about at goingrogue.co.
goingrogue.co. If I can get my stuff together in the technical realm, I will put a link in the comments.
Beautiful.
If you are watching live and you would like to put a comment or a question in for Imani, go for it. Imani is mostly here to talk to us about participatory budgeting, and they've been a big part of leading the way with the people's budget here in Athens. So Imani, would you like to introduce everybody to the people's budget first, or the idea of participatory budgeting?
Yeah, so I co-founded the People's Budget last year in response to the budget recommendations from Mayor Gertz for this current fiscal year. It just really came out of looking at just looking over the budget document. Really, I think probably for the first time that I really delved into it. And being absolutely infuriated. I remember it was the middle of the night, probably like 2 or 3 in the morning. And I was just like, honestly, kind of in shock scrolling to see where the money actually goes. And not even just specifically the monetary amounts. I don't even think that is what's most interesting about the document. But it has the performance measures of each department, so like their goals and objectives. It's where you can actually see the numbers of like the number of people served by these programs and things like that in more detail, that actually I think are a better representation of the scope than necessarily seeing like the abstract number of such and such millions of dollars. To actually see that it's like, okay, there are 80 residents in the diversion center or whatever it may be. Right. And 100 at, well, actually, darn, there goes my surprise question that I was going to throw in later of how many people we think are at the jail. But it's around like 150 inmates. So when I think of the full scope of the judicial system and the function, I kind of like the carceral system, the main goal is, the incarceration ultimately of people. It's like the key force behind it. So to see that when we're talking about that in Athens, we're talking about on average about 150 people at any given time, that we have to invest such and such amount of money, the corrections budget, to managing and maintaining this group of 150 people, essentially. So that's when like breaking it down in that way makes it easier for me to process like, okay, does this seem like a reasonable expense to me? If we're allocating insert whatever amount of money here to manage 100 people in a community of almost 150,000 people, like to really put things in perspective. So in response to that, myself and Chris Xavier and some other community organizers that were activated really around the time of the protests last summer in response to police brutality, and the call broadly to defund the police, which we'll also touch on in this discussion, because we'll get there. But yeah, through that process, what we wanted to do was essentially, after seeing some of the key things, like one thing that really struck me was a holiday party. I will never forget this. It will permanently be stuck in my brain that there was a line item recommended for a holiday party that was around $30,000. And just really thinking like, wow, there are so many initiatives that I've worked with over the years that if I think of what a $30,000 infusion, while being like not even a lot of money is, I mean, but for a one-day party is definitely a lot of money to me. It was little things like that I was like, okay, I really think that anyone, if they knew and saw in plain language where we spend our money, and how the percentages also, something that I'll emphasize later, of how the pie of our whole budget is broken up. If you actually see it, does it make sense to you? Not even to say, like, I can provide my opinion, but really genuinely asking people, like, does this make sense? Because I think we just kind of assume that it would. And so there's no further question. And not even, I guess, to be more specific than does this make sense to you? Is this in alignment with your values and your desire for, how we spend the money in our community and how resources are allocated? So we surveyed approximately, I think, 1,300 people through both online and physical door-to-door canvassing to just talk about budget priorities and where people wanted to see increased investment and where they wanted to see divestment. And even though I think, just to briefly touch on defunding the police, it seems like, I guess, some sort of random attack. like we have just chosen that, like the people, the angry people have chosen to target the police departments for, whatever insert reasons that we want to ascribe to this group of people. And it is kind of arbitrary, I guess we'll say. But realistically, I mean, the budget is only broken down into, I think, maybe 10 or 11 pieces of pie. And one of the largest ones is the police. So it could be anything, really. Now, the fact that the purpose is public safety and they also murder us, that just adds to me additional reason to consider, that particular pie specifically, that, maybe there's a little more to engage with here. Is it effective? Things like that. Like, that's a separate conversation, but just looking at the budget, period. And actually, let's see, I have a graph from specifically last year's results. So I'll briefly share my screen. Can you see? Oh, there it is. Okay. Here we go. So this is from last year's budget. Now, as we see, so I said what, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's actually 8, not even 10. That are the main headings of the way that our budget is divided. So it's like, to me, if I'm talking about any sort of investment, wanting to invest resources and move them, because we do have a limited pot of resources, that is in this particular context, I guess we'll say. And so when we're looking at the money that our local government has to spend and how it is divided, it's obvious to me that I have essentially 4 key areas that I'm going to look at reallocating resources from. because they're the largest pieces of the pie here. I'm not going to start at debt service or housing and development, because at that point we're talking about 5%. I mean, that's already not a very large amount. Now, comparatively, then when I see that the police budget is at 26%, that is definitely, as the second largest, only in comparison to the judicial system over here, which is 28% of the total budget. Those two are screaming out to me that, oh, there's definitely probably space for paring down these budgets. And that's before we even get into, questions of moral obligation and, the very legitimate reasons why people call for the police to be defunded, in addition to just the fact that, fiscal responsibility wise, it makes, the most sense. So that was kind of our main focus for last year, is getting other people to see, for one, the way things were currently laid out, and just asking, does this line up with where you want money to be spent as well?
Right.
And so let's see, just quickly to review what the main takeaways from that were. So our top desires were investment in public health and food security, as far as for investment. And then top desires for divestment, we had 86% of respondents saying policing, and then parking enforcement. It was the next with almost 84%. So these are just really broad strokes as far as looking, not even so much in the details, but just at the way the numbers are laid out, were members of our community at. And specifically, we were going to primarily doing canvassing in public housing and the areas that are over-policed.
Right.
So that in that case, what we would consider to be the most directly impacted people by the budget that we're discussing, and the line items specifically when we're talking about policing, the judicial system, juvenile courts, things like that, that we are critiquing or questioning to see, is this actually working for them? And is this in alignment with what they want? And so when the answer to that question was obviously no, and we actually have input on other things that we would like to see the money go to, that is when we started an advocacy effort toward the local mayor and commission, and speaking to them about, at that time, postponing the budget vote so that there could be more community input on the budget, as it didn't line up with the community's desires.
Yeah.
Which seems to me like a very reasonable request. But they claimed that, it wasn't possible. There wasn't enough time because the deadline was coming up. And as such, essentially the implication was that, if they didn't pass the budget, all the lights would just turn off. It's like it would hit 12 o'clock a.m. and then the city would shut down if they didn't pass the budget. When realistically, according to the charter, what would happen is they would just use the previous year's budget,
right,
until the next one has been established. There's not like anything would be drastically impacted. I think that we were specifically talking about the operations portion of the budget. I want to say it's divided into two, and not the capital projects, being that that's nothing that we're not speaking to capital projects. So it's like, you go ahead and pass that portion. But for the part that touches on, all the other resources, can we just hold off on it? That was literally the extent of the ask at that point in time. And that from there, participatory budgeting is, the format in which the specific democratic process that I would like to see the local government use in order to involve the community more in these decisions. But at that time, because it was only in a few weeks, we weren't even necessarily asking for a participatory budgeting process at that time. But to do even just like similarly to what we had done, doing some form of surveying, some form of seeking input, and then actually acknowledging those responses as a part of their decision-making practice, rather than only considering, the 10 perspectives of the people in the room, but also saying, we have these results as well. How is that going to factor into our decision-making? So ultimately, that did not take place, and they went ahead with the budget. So then fast forward to the ongoing efforts of the People's Budget work to continue that advocacy for participatory budgeting. And this is when I kept my screen shared, so I can go ahead and share the video that just does a really good job of actually showing in a way that is visual and more real, I guess, what participatory budgeting looks like, than necessarily if I were to describe it as something that isn't happening here right now. It's like kind of hard to really imagine because it's not like anything that we've been exposed to. So here is this. And you can hear that, right? Aaron?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Oh, okay. Great. Just want to make sure.
Community, and you pay taxes, come out and vote and decide how your tax dollars get spent.
Participatory budgeting gives people real power over real money to make the decisions that affect their lives. It's a democratic process in which ordinary community members directly decide to spend parts of public budget.
Oh, this is different because you're actually voting for where the money is going to be spent instead of allowing them to decide where to spend the money. Who knows better about their community than the people that live in their community?
Not be afraid of the big words, participatory budgeting. It sounds boring, but it's the opposite of that.
So how does it work? First, people brainstorm ideas. They come together in meetings and assemblies and start to think of what kinds of projects they would like to see in their neighborhood.
We have to think big. We have $1 million that we could use so we can fund parks, health issues, streets.
Volunteers work with experts to turn people's initial ideas into full project proposals.
We started with maybe about 40 projects, and so we had a series of budget delegate meetings, and we narrowed down the list into about 4 or 5 projects.
We met with the Parks Department and we talked about what we wanted to see change in some of the parks and how we were going to work with them.
What are the real needs of the community? If you only have a certain amount of money, what is it that you can do that's going to benefit as many people as possible? I'm dreaming of new benches, modern benches. Seniors have nowhere to go.
Displays at bus shelters throughout the district, and it will tell people when the next bus is due to arrive.
We're asking for a projector and 30 Mac laptops.
State-of-the-art fitness center.
To put solar panels on a firehouse.
After volunteers share the top projects, the community gets ready to vote.
It's a way of validating every voice in our community and saying, you know what, whatever your position is, you live in our community, you have a right to decide, and that me as a representative and government should respond and should listen to that voice. Anybody can vote in this process, immigrants, whether you're documented or not, people that normally don't get to vote.
Most people, they don't even know that CEOs can come out here and vote today. Some of them are really surprised. They said, really? I said, yeah. They have a voice.
The projects with the most votes get funded.
The Red Hook Library Community Garden.
The projects are then implemented over the next few years. In the following year, the process starts again. People brainstorm new ideas, turn them into new projects, vote on them, and fund more improvements for their community. PB becomes part of the budget process. It becomes a new way of governing.
I think this is like the greatest wave of democracy coming into the United States. It started in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989.
From there, it spread all over Latin America to over 1,500 cities around the world. In Toronto, public housing tenants have decided how to spend millions of dollars on improvements to their buildings. City council members in Chicago, New York, and other cities have engaged thousands of residents in allocating discretionary funds. Entire cities have launched PB, such as in Vallejo, California, for funds from a sales tax, and in Boston for youth funds. Even schools and universities have used PB.
This was a great opportunity for you to be a part of government and better the city you live in. And who wouldn't want to take advantage of that?
You're creating a more educated platform of voters overall. So I think this can only be good for the big project of democracy.
So that, well, before I get your general feedback on, because I've never talked to you specifically about participatory budgeting, but one question that I want to get out of the way immediately, just right out the gate, now that you've seen that video, is that the SPLOST process?
No.
Oh, it's not?
No.
Interesting. Okay, and you were able to deduce that from the 4-minute video that was just showed there.
As I have become more familiar with SPLOST and participated in it myself, I know that that is not the SPLOST process.
Okay, this comes up often, mainly from members of the commission that have been confused for almost a year now about how this is different from the SPLOST process. I actually just received an email not but a week ago asking me if I could put in writing how it's different than the SPLOST process. And I can do that. It just, you know, as a volunteer, non-employee of the government, doing this sort of reporting on what seems really obvious to me upon taking even just the slightest bit of, you know, let me look into it. I just Googled participatory budgeting. What is it? Okay, it's not that. Like, I don't feel like I need a one-pager or anything to outline that. So just to go ahead and get that out of the way, but yes, what are your thoughts seeing the video? And also, as someone who has worked in SPLOST or participated in previous processes, I would be interested to hear what your experience would be or was like, and noticing the differences as well.
Yes. Well, I will say, for one thing, my participation was that I got to vote on a list that was pre-made and had a bunch of stuff on it that I didn't want, but had one thing on it that I really wanted. And that was what won me over. And I voted yes on SPLOST, even though I felt really conflicted. And lots of people were like, that was stupid, don't vote on that. And I was like, eh. But anyway, you know, the Bethel Homes project, to me, I was like, we need to like do stuff like this. Absolutely. I want to see more things like this. Like, that was the thing that sold me. But whether or not you have to do this whole thing where you are still voting on a bunch of BS, like, arenas getting built, which feels even more absurd now, right? Like, after this past year, after the pandemic, to be like that, why are we having any money spent on those things right now? As
Right.
if we were not in a crisis before the pandemic. People need housing. People need grocery stores. People need jobs, and good jobs. Like, yeah. So the SPLOS process has a lot to do with other people making choices about a list that then people get to vote on. Versus what it looks like to me with participatory budgeting is that you might have, say, like a pool of money. As you said, what if it started with like the money for the holiday party?
Right.
Or just take some money from, the giant police budget. Like, I'm sure there are things in there that are not necessary.
Errors, these sorts, it's not uncommon. Anyone that has a budget knows that sometimes you have to adjust it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like there are areas that go over. Oh, I spent less here. It just isn't, this isn't, a novel concept. But sorry, go on.
And then the idea, I mean, what I think is so cool about participatory budgeting, whichever way you do it, whether it's a bunch of projects already predetermined, but then you have to ask who's determining those projects, or if it's a chunk of money and you have collaboration between everybody to figure out what that money is going to be spent on. Like, whichever way you do that, like it's engaging the community. And as you guys showed, you went and literally went door to door, right?
Right.
And asked people what they want to see in their community. And these weren't the people who are normally asked what they want to see anyway. These are probably a lot of people who are pretty disillusioned with the idea of voting for anything, would be my guess.
Definitely. And so it's like so there's that component of, I've been granted the opportunity to vote in support of this whole list of that, like with no nuance, not actually provide any sort of real constructive feedback at all. So it also just, it really limits like what we're claiming to be participation. Compared to, what we see as participatory budgeting, where it's an ongoing process that you're included in from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Like, how did we get to the proposals at all?
Right.
Where did this list come from? Now I'm just looking at this arbitrary list that I have no ownership of,
right,
at all, other than like, as far as there's money that I put in to like subsidize all of this happening. The fact that I pay for this, this service, I guess, to get this opportunity, there's that. But as far as actually really being acknowledged, not at all. And people can tell, that's where a part of the disillusionment comes in, is that we know when we're having these sort of just broad surveys almost of feedback, but not even really surveying, because it's not like you could submit comments in the margins or something either. It's very different when you're doing something that is centering the members of the community and their ability to participate, mm-hmm. and something that is centering the decision maker, basically. Right. And so I think it's like really our vote is for their convenience, if anything. And not even that, because really it's just to consent to the list. So at that point, we're kind of not even necessarily, because most of the decisions of the nitty gritty of these proposals are happening prior to the vote. That pool of people who are actually providing input there is much, much smaller. I know I've never been to I presume the meetings take place by the government also, not just the groups that are doing the proposal. I think realistically, I'm assuming the classic center like never did their own community outreach.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I can't say for sure. Maybe it happened.
Right.
But yeah, it's like the window of time that you can get familiar with, you know, whatever the problem is that the proposal is trying to address.
Right.
And then also this group's solution. And the time that then it's time to vote, it's like, it's not possible to really be involved.
Right.
And so that is one of the key things that I emphasize is, you know, that there are different forms of democracy. And we kind of just like use democracy broadly as a, yeah, something that an all encompassing word, really. And, you know, that isn't actually the case. Like participatory budgeting being a form of direct democracy, like we are directly able to influence decision making, versus representative democracy, where we, the collective we, that's actually like only a sub portion of the people that went to vote, get to elect a person that will make all these decisions on our behalf, which, you know, we are putting a lot of trust in that one person when we do that. And again, that's talking about in a community of 150,000, our current structure says it makes sense to be like, okay, those 10, they got it. Those are my people. And you know what, whatever, I trust them to make all the decisions, to be the all-knowing Oz's of our community, that are somehow going to represent the full 150.
And I mean, right, the thing that I think I like the most of what I've seen about participatory budgeting in its concept that at least, yeah, just in my experience, is that we're not even necessarily, everyone's invited to participate, right? But the people who are actively engaged, which means they're being outreached to, like, those are the folks who don't normally get to do this, right? Like people who are like, at least that's what I feel like y'all were aiming at, and that's what we should be doing anyway.
Yes, and it's like who don't get to because it is inaccessible. So it's like really a lot of the key differences are just how do we make the process actually accessible to people. Right. So for one, yeah, it's different if I go and get input from you directly than if I, you know, have a meeting where you can come and provide input. Or I can solicit. That's the thing. The idea of why they want to claim that it's so similar to the SPLOS process is that, well, we can participate because we can submit a proposal. So as though any person, you can just come out with a proposal, whatever that means to you, you know, and go up against also like writers from organizations that like
people.
A key part of their job is writing similar proposals.
Right.
And that this is something that they possibly have received training or actual practice in. Some have actually paid for education to set them up to succeed doing these sorts of things, right?
But you, average person with a nice idea about how to improve your community, you must now write this proposal.
Also,
and
with no support.
Being compared, mind you.
Exactly. So then it's like, we already know that if that were the case, and we just had, you know, John Doe from down the street submit what they consider to be a proposal, which as far as I'm concerned, can be very clear in one page. You know, this is what I propose. This is the problem. Here's what I'd like to see. When what they're expecting is much more detailed and Yeah, just a much more and labor intensive process than what is reciprocal in the outreach component, like what is actually being facilitated by the government. So essentially they're just putting out like a Facebook post and a website update, and you're then supposed to develop a whole proposal for consideration that might just, you know, be thrown away altogether. But that is something that you're supposed to take on your own.
And that exact kind of process, sorry, I didn't want to derail you.
No, that's, go ahead.
I mean, that exact kind of process, I totally understand, like, why would folks trust that? You know, even if there was someone there to help them write the proposals, which is an interesting idea. But if there was like a staff member who, like, you have a proposal but you don't know how to do that, you're like, I don't know, that's not my job, also I work 2 other jobs, then they're like, oh, I'll help you out with this.
Right.
That's one step in like trying to create public trust. But even still, if that person, you're one person with that proposal, how do they get the same amount of weight in their proposal as someone like Paul Kramer, who represents the Classic Center and gets in every year, or not every year, but every time SPLOST comes around? Boop.
Right.
You know? And
so, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, that's not, you know, I'm not like, I hate the Classic Center, but I'm just, it's like, but money to people.
Right. And then it also, so we have like that as one side of the problem, that it's not an equal playing field at all. We've been using equity as a buzzword for like 2 years now, and it seems to me that if there was any sort of actual like actionable implementation of an equitable framework, that wouldn't even pass the smell test at all. Because it's like, how do we just have people, you know, your average individual that I want the most directly impacted people to be a part of the process. So I'm expecting those that have been under-resourced to have the same level of access as people that have the resources and have been over-resourced in the community to participate in this way. Knowing that the same concerns have come up over the years of people, we know that civic engagement is low. Like, this is not this is not something that anyone's confused about. So it's not even that we have to sort of prove that in and of itself. We know that there are barriers to the process. So it just seems so obvious to me that when we see, okay, no, this isn't accessible. But then on the other side of it, we still have this idea that this one person can put together a proposal that really addresses whatever the issue is in a holistic way. Compared to another key distinction in participatory budgeting is that there's a process of community decision making and brainstorming that is happening. It's not just, Aaron, tell me what to do about homelessness.
Oh, good. Got all the solutions.
It's like, that makes no sense.
Right.
The idea that any of us, we are clear on what the problems are.
Right.
But to say that it would possibly make sense for one individual, and particularly when it's, you know, traditionally the same handful of individuals that are civically engaged, to essentially make all of the decisions, and to know all there is to know about the ins and outs of the community, and where certain pressure points are, you know, to leverage changes. Right. How could that be possible for one person to grasp? So to me, this is just the most logical next response from, I guess, what the representative democracy that we've been practicing, that now I think we can all see very clearly. It's like, okay, no, there's a lot of problems that we would like to address. We're destroying the planet. People can't afford to live. There's actually community members living in tents in the woods. Like, this is actually our current reality. perhaps that suggests to me that we need to reevaluate our process. Maybe it's not, bulletproof, and perhaps there's room for improvement, is kind of how I get on this pathway to look for other options.
Right.
And so that's one thing that continues to confuse me about the hesitancy, when it's like, okay, well, if we continue doing the same thing and expecting different results, and this is on top of knowing that really many of these issues, if not all, honestly, are like getting worse. Conditions are getting more intense that require the response. So it's like, it's not even like our current processes, the timeline realistically that most government projects, even a SPLOST project, is what, like a almost 10-year process to get through the list.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the social issues that we're dealing with have that kind of turnaround time, honestly, can afford for that to be what it takes to realize changes in the community. So again, these are all things that when I see something like participatory budgeting, that is an infrastructure that already exists, that people have been practicing, tweaking, and learning from, developing best practices since 1990, that seems like I'm seeing opportunity. Perhaps we can correct, because right now we don't even really have an infrastructure for this type of participation, for a more like all hands on deck approach to the fact that our community is burning. And so it's like, this to me is why I find it to be so compelling, is that it is an intentional effort that also it's not super taxing either on any participants. It's a process that is resourced and facilitated, that it requires really just like a couple of community meetings, which many of us have gone to a few community meetings. Sure. If those meetings actually manifested in material changes, it would have been much more rewarding, and we would probably still be going to some of those meetings.
Before we I guess we're kind of heading into almost being on an hour here, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, Imani, but took a couple of things I wanted to mention. I remember I read an article actually like just the other day that was talking about a city in Colombia that had this like horrific wealth disparity. Like one side of the city was like super rich people, and then the other half was just like slums and folks living in, like tents and stuff. But the whole city turned around into one of the most well-planned, like well-organized and equitable cities in the world, because they started doing participatory budgeting, and that actually like bringing in the voices of the folks who were living in the tents, like meshed together, and they actually like planned stuff together and started like, taxing the rich and helping people with that money. So that was one thing as I was just popped into my brain. I was like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about where participatory budgeting really helped people. Yes. And then the other thing, two last things I want to hit is talking a little bit more about like, okay, specifically, did the people's budget ask for a chunk of money, or was it asking for a specific project?
No. So really the ask has been for one to hire the participatory budgeting project, to actually, they offer technical assistance in helping cities, and well, not just cities, schools, public housing, whatever entity is trying to use participatory budgeting. They're like consultants that facilitate that process. So I think Jesse mentioned in the last video that they had a meeting with them, and notice how then there's still questions like, is this different from the SPLOST process. So that's why I say we're not just looking for a meeting. I think it would really be a great start to just have them actually come do the community meetings themselves. They do sessions with the elected officials and staff to really help people understand the process and raise awareness about the process as well.
Cool.
So that is a very small, specific ask. I think their packages are between $20,000 and $60,000, depending on how much involvement you want them to have in your process.
That's a small portion of a holiday party.
Exactly, and especially when you look at how much the revenue that comes from things like parking tickets. Personally, I feel like we should be able to, at minimum, so maybe this gets into the amount. I want to be able to, when I get a parking ticket, say at least this is going directly to something that will benefit the community.
Right.
You know, if that amount, and I want to say, I don't want to try to take the time to find the line item, but it's somewhere in the, like around $1 million for, I want to say the downtown specific parking violation. Those are down due to COVID, but what they are typically, when to actually like have that much input, because it's something that's very small, a lot of us are paying into. It's like, to me, any sort of fine, traffic tickets, all of these things that end up going to the city, that is directly us giving our money to the government that they use as revenue to then make decisions like this. So to me, it only makes sense that we would be able to have at least that much say for something that is minuscule. That is like, okay, this is our every $5 or $10 investment. But typically I think of that as being the ask, not even a certain amount of money, but maybe discussing it more in percentages. So like we'll say we start out with 1% of the total budget. And then also wanting to acknowledge a plan to increase because, you know, in the United States, they will have you at, we'll be on 1% until the end of time, regardless of circumstance, whatever happens. So to say that we're not trying to cap it there, that would be a starting point to essentially have that proof of concept, get people practice. This is the pilot of implementation.
Right.
And then once we see that it works, obviously, to me, it only makes sense. It's like, oh, okay, we're getting more effective solutions because we're involving the people that are closest to the issue. Yeah. So that as that becomes more clear, it's just like continue. How much can we handle at that point? Like, how involved can we actually facilitate the community being? Which to me is an obvious, like, we want to maximize that. I would think this doesn't seem like a radical approach to me. And it really just kind of like that next evolution of our democratic process.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all for more democracy. So last note, how would you ideally like to see people get involved? Is it with the people's budget or just advocating like we want to see participatory budgeting? What are you hoping to see?
Yeah, no, really our main focus is building support in the community. We need it's like, I hate that we have to beg our government to do things. It seems odd to me that it's like, do I really have to, how many years do we have to talk about it before it makes it onto like the official consideration? Yeah, that's our ultimate goal, is to reach the people and to continue to engaging them. And honestly, really through participating, like I think our social media, so that you know when things are going on, for one, and when upcoming assemblies are, to get involved in these processes, because really I'm at the point now where it's like, while we continue the advocacy with the local government, there's also, quite frankly, just things that we can continue to do in the meantime. If we have to seek our own resources, granted, it would be a lot more helpful if the government that exists to help us would, facilitate the process. Don't get me wrong. But from what we have to do, if we have to do it on our own at a much smaller scale, let's do that also. So it's open involvement now in that process. So we've had 2 assemblies speaking on. The first was just kind of discussing what are the problems that people are seeing, and what are some, potential solutions also that we're seeing in other areas that are responding to these issues, and uplifting those within small groups. Then going into the next phase of the process, just kind of following the participatory budget process itself, really. So going from brainstorming the issues to the next assembly of actually discussing more proposals in more detail. So we specifically focused on housing and labor at the second assemblies. So looking at how would we want to respond to these particular issues? And so then the ongoing effort being to continue the development of those proposals, so that, they can be used, of course, when any of these things floss or whatever pot of money appears, we can use them at those times. But to also just begin the practice of, what does a process like this look like, and how can it work in our community? And to start getting people familiar around it as well, because, that's the thing that they refuse to acknowledge, is that there is no quick outreach process. Like actually building a grassroots support for an idea or concept is a long process. So it's like, the longer we take to invest in, we still have to get people to buy into that process, and to want to participate because of this disillusionment that we've already discussed. So we're just trying to get the ball rolling, essentially, as the government continues to kind of, take their time.
Bureaucracy.
Yay.
Cool. So there's people can get involved with the People's Budget if they want to, by going onto the website.
Yeah. So the People's Budget Athens.com. I'm lying. Let me look it up. Just to make sure.
And they'd be able to see, like, if there are future assemblies happening, when that
information. You'll also see, like, the survey results from last year in more detail. That's peoplesbudgetathens.org, not .com.
There you go.
And then also the People's Budget Athens on Facebook and Instagram as well, you can find. So any of those outlets to see information about upcoming assemblies, but also just the resources, period, on the website are really good. And discussing, because these are sort of new ideas, like, to be able to start getting familiar with those also. So definitely would check out the website.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us and spending your time in your evening when you could be resting with us, and just, sharing these thoughts and spreading the word about participatory budgeting, because that does sound like a really good process we should get more involved in.
Fingers crossed. Thank you for inviting me into this conversation and facilitating. Also, always happy to talk about, some of the real possibilities that we have out of this time, because it has been a really trying one.
It has. Thanks for bringing that kind of on a positive note. Yeah, there are possibilities. I hope no one feels like there aren't.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. It's like, after being involved in so many different areas over the years and seeing the limitations in all of those places, to finally discover something that's like, oh wow, no, this could actually facilitate the changes that we're trying to see, is very exciting. So definite possibilities out there.
For sure. Thanks, Imani. Thanks everybody who watched. Check out the peoplesbudgetathens.org and see some resources and see how you might get involved, or talk to your local government or your neighbors and see what you guys can come up with.
Yes.
Love it. All right, y'all. Take care. Have a good rest of your day, your evening, wherever you're at.
You too.